a frame. So the legacy of Lorenzo Langstroth is that he created a hive that you could basically read like a book. You can open up the hive and you can pull out each page. You can look up what's going on with the brood, what's going on with the food. You can find out if the hive has any diseases, what kind of quality the queen is. You can tell if there are eggs, if there are larvae, if there's any kind of mite problem. And you can do that with any hive that has a removable frame. So Langstroth is the most popular, but there's also top bars. Everybody know what a top bar is? This is a top bar, goes on a Tanzanian top bar hive, which is shaped like a trapezoid, is that the word? Yeah, shaped like a trapezoid. And the reason for that is because you don't want the bees to attach the comb to the bottom of the box. For some mysterious reason that I don't completely understand, they'll never attach the comb to the bottom of the box. This is a comb freely drawn by the bees on what I think Sam Comfort likes to call the forefront of beekeeping technology, which is a skewer. You can buy these at Publix, you can buy them at the Asian market, you can do a lot of really cool things with them. You want to get the super jumbo size. The regular middle-sized ones and the skinny ones, they don't work. You have to have the super jumbo size. The nice thing about them is that you can kind of bend them a little, and so they can take a lot of weight without snapping. You can also use any kind of strip of wood or dowel or anything that will fit in the bar rest of the box. A bar rest is one of these. This is a Warrior style box, also made by Sam Comfort, who is sitting in the back of the room. And these right here, these wooden shims that you see, everybody in the back, can you see this? Little gap between the top of the box and this wooden shim here, that's called a bar rest. If you're looking at a Langstroth hive.
Tucka, I got this up and running for you.
Oh, what you got? Oh, all right, you get to see me kissing geese. It's very exciting. Well, we're on to something here, though, because we might as well talk a little bit about equipment. So with any kind of bee box that you have, you're going to want to have a lid. You can have either a telescoping cover on a 10-frame deep, which is the kind that has that shiny metal top. Those are really popular. I don't love them the most because the bees tend to probolize them to the top of the hive unless you use an inner cover, which isn't really necessary in Florida because it's very warm here. On this box, who can see the bar rest area? Right here? So any box that you're going to keep bees in that you want to be able to remove the frames, that's a really useful thing to have. You got a bottom board that the hive sits on. You can make any of these components out of just about anything. It's often the easiest thing to just use the Langstroth equipment because you can purchase it easily here, at the meetings, or at your local bee supply store, or online. Just get it delivered to your doorstep. But if you feel like being a little more creative or you have limited resources, you can acquire the things that you need to keep bees for just about nothing. Another really important tool of the trade, hive tool. This is probably one of the most ubiquitous designs for a hive tool that I've seen. It's got this 90-degree angle at the end. This is really useful for scraping things, getting old wax off of boxes, prying things open with good leverage. You can use this end to leverage things up, or you can use this end to leverage things that are stuck a little bit closer down into the lid. Like if you use a top feeder, you'll have a lid with a hole in it, and that feeder will sit down in that hole. Sometimes it gets stuck in there. You got to use the hive tool to pry it out. I basically always have this on me. I like to wear a tool belt when I work. I stick it in my tool belt. If I don't have that tool belt on, I will lose this in about 5 seconds. If you don't have one of these, I also had a butter knife packed in my bag of things to bring, but I forgot it.
Buy many of them.
Yeah, definitely buy a lot of hive tools. But a nice sturdy butter knife will work in a pinch, or a screwdriver, or again, just about any kind of firm metal object that you can find.
Your butter knife is on the bottom of your truck underneath
Oh,
the frames.
thanks. My butter knife is buried under a pile of equipment in my truck. All right, so let's maybe start a few of these things going around the room so people can get a look at this little natural comb for anybody who hasn't seen one of those. You're also going to want to have one of these. This is a smoker. This part of the smoker is called the bellows, and it's got a hole in the bottom where the air can come out. And a grate in the bottom also, so that the things that you put in there to light on fire don't fall through and block the flow of air. And this is a really handy tool because when you smoke bees, it gets them to eat honey. They think that their house is on fire, and they immediately go and gorge themselves on honey. And that means that they're not busy stinging you in the face, which is definitely something that you want when you're a beginning beekeeper doing a hive inspection. Who knows what a hive inspection is?
Chris does.
Yeah? Anybody wanna take a gander at it? Tell me what's a hive inspection?
Beginner version of a hive inspection.
Uh-huh.
Get your smoker going,
Okay.
put your suit on, hit the entrance of the hive with a little smoke.
Mm-hmm.
I do a little smoke around the lid, escape there,
Sure.
pull it off, because I have a lid and then I have an inner lid as well, so I pull my top lid off, and then hit another little smoke in a little hole in the center, and I lift the inner lid up about an inch, wait about 5 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
and then I come off with it slowly, and then I would go from there to check and see where my brood, where they're building and where she's at and where all the action's happening. And I would start from the outside, pull the empty ones out, and then make room for the other ones, and then slide them out. Now here's a question though.
Okay.
On a beginner brood box, when you just start a hive in there and they just go crazy in there with their brood,
Mm-hmm.
is it better to just let them go if you know she's in there and just leave the bottom box alone?
Versus what? What's the other option?
Cutting the comb and
Oh, if they start to build crazy comb.
yeah, that's what yeah.
That's a personal decision.
I don't like that's when it's too soon, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean,
But I just pull it up and I would check frame by frame.
the thing about crazy comb is that the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. So that for people who don't know, crazy comb is an affectionate term that beekeepers like to use for comb that the bees build wherever the heck they feel like it. Often that will be attached to the bottoms of the frames right here. And you'll find it kind of closing the gap between the boxes that the bees are living in. And that's one of their favorite activities. They love to put drones there, especially if you're using plastic foundation. This plastic foundation, it's really in there, but it pops right out of these frames and it pops back in. You can take it out, you don't have to use it. The bees will draw comb by themselves. They'll actually draw comb that has a slightly smaller cell size. This foundation forces them to draw comb that's a particular size. This is an interesting topic that you'll hear more about if you get into beekeeping and one day you decide that you want to be treatment-free, which I'm sure is a term that some people here have heard of. That's a little more advanced, so we won't go too deep into it, but maybe I know there's nothing in this talk about the basics of bee biology. All right. Very nice observation hive, Lee. So can everybody more or less see what's going on in this observation hive? If you need to stand up or get a better eye on it, you can, or you can come up and look at it after. But in this observation hive, I have a feeling we're going to see most of the things that we're going to want to be able to identify as beginning beekeepers. One of them is capped honey. You see that typically around the top and the sides of the frame. It's going to be covered in a wax. Look at it, it won't be shiny or wet. That's how you tell if it's capped. Just inside of that, you see some shiny cells that have what looks like liquid inside of them. That's nectar. The difference between nectar and honey is that nectar is food that the bees have just harvested from the flowers. They haven't cured it yet. What they do is they stand on the comb and they fan their wings after regurgitating the nectar into the cells. They stand on the comb and fan their wings and they dehydrate it. They also add pollen to it and mix it together to make a substance called bee bread. That's something that is probably one of the first really interesting smells that you're going to become familiar with as a beekeeper. One day I'll walk into the bee yard and you'll be overwhelmed by this delicious aroma of slightly fermenty, tangy, sweet, rich pollen. And that means that the bees are making bee bread, which means that they're feeding babies, which means that they're growing, which means that you are a happy beekeeper and it's spring. So the thing just inside of the shiny nectar is a slightly different shade of brown. It's more matte, more dull. Those cappings are cappings on brood. Brood is a capped baby bee. So each cell has one baby bee inside of it, and that wax with that brown matte color is covering that bee while it pupates. So what happens is the queen bee, who's the mama of all the bees in the hive, lays an egg in each one of these cells. After 3 days, that egg hatches, and then it becomes a larva, which actually initially looks even smaller than the egg. It's so small that you can barely see it. It's in a tiny little C shape curled in the bottom of the cell, sitting in a pool of royal jelly. And royal jelly is a food that is fed to all of the young bees, but queen bees especially are fed on a diet of only royal jelly, which I think is where it gets its name. So the larva will grow, they get fatter, they get to a stage that You see some of in here, but you'll have to get close to see it. They look like little pearls sitting in the bottom of the cells. So some beekeepers call that pearl. All right, I think that covers the basics. Almost all of the bees in this observation hive, possibly even all, are female. All the worker bees in the hive are female. All of the harvesting of food, all of the caretaking of brood, secreting of wax, building of comb, all of the work that goes on in the hive is done by the lady bees. The drone bees are slightly bigger. They're actually haploid, which means that they have half the genetic material of the worker bees and the queen. It's a really interesting phenomenon because it means that when they mate and they breed, a drone essentially has no father. Instead, he's mating with, the one queen is mating with a carbon copy of that drone's mother. And so the genetics come down the line entirely matrilineally, which means that you can see some really interesting crossing of characteristics if you get super dorky about all this. All right, do we have a clicker?
No, but I'll be the clicker.
You're gonna be my clicker?
I'll be your
All right,
clicker.
all right. Okay, this is me. From the time I was a small child, I loved nature. I was very into everything that crawled and squished and crunched and wiggled. And give me the next one. I don't even remember what's in this presentation. This is gonna be super fun. Oh, this was about me being a farmer first. Give me the next one. All right, growing things. It's beautiful. Next. This was actually in the presentation that I planned for today, so this is great. This is a picture of a formal English garden where I first got into bees. When I was 26 years old, I was diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. It was really destructive to my life. I was diagnosed at 17, but at 26, I still hadn't fixed it. And I had gone to all sorts of doctors. I had been on antibiotics, 3 different kinds for over a year. I wasn't really able to function. And so I went over to Europe for a specialty treatment in Germany that I had heard of. And while I was there, I decided to do some woofing. Does anyone know what woofing is? It's an organization called Willing Workers on Organic Farms. You can go anywhere in the world and you can volunteer 25 to 35 hours of your time per week in exchange for room, board, and education about organic farming. It's an amazing program. At this point, I had decided that I either needed to buy a tractor or quit farming. But so my list was orchards or bees. Bees happened while I was waiting for my treatment to settle to get retested before coming back to the States. I spent 2 months woofing at a place called the Natural Beekeeping Trust in England. It's about an hour south of London, and they had about 30 or 35 colonies being held in what they called a bee sanctuary. So there's a lot of different beekeepers out there. If folks who are new here haven't noticed yet, there are people who are commercial beekeepers, there are people who are backyard beekeepers, there are people who like to treat their bees and people who don't. Everybody thinks that everybody else is wrong. Pretty much every beekeeper I've ever met thinks that they know better than everyone else what's going on. I personally am really invested in exploring how we can collaborate as different types of beekeepers. I had my start here. Tending this formal English garden, I actually personally trimmed these topiaries. It was very, very exciting. And all of these flowers are food for the bees. And I would basically just catch swarms. And so every time there was a swarm, literally everything would stop. Somebody would run for the gear. Somebody would run for a big white sheet. Someone would run and make tea. Someone would run. Someone would run and get a box. And we would spread the white sheet out on the ground, and the swarm would land, and hopefully it would be within distance that we could reach. And we would take a skep, which is a straw basket, another very interesting type of hive. I had a lot about this on the other presentation. They're awesome. They've been in use for keeping bees for uncounted years, basically. I believe, correct me if anybody in the audience knows this, I believe there are skeps in existence made of rye straw that are over 100 years old, still in use. You can keep bees in stone blocks. You can keep them in, there are people who build houses out of beehives with drawers that you can pull the hive out of and then select what you want, honey or brood. Some people actually eat brood. It's considered a delicacy in some countries. So the skep, you take this basket and you hang it under where the swarm is hanging. You'll see them bivouacked. Does anybody not know what a swarm is? awesome. So you'll see them bivouacked, hanging from this branch, or your soffit, or the rear view mirror of your car, or wherever else you happen to find them. You hold the basket under them, and then you give whatever they're hanging on to a sharp shake. If you can't reach it, you can use something longer, like a gaffing hook for sheep, or you can use a pool net if you can't reach the bees. And I like to put a sheet inside of the pool net so that when the bulk of the bees falls into the net, the sheet closes over them and they can't fly away. I do that when I'm climbing a tree to catch a swarm. Actually, while I was here, I climbed over 40 feet into a tree to reach up and catch a swarm and then carry it down with the net over my back. So I had a lot of fun this summer. I learned a lot about bees. I saw a couple of queens. I didn't learn really anything at all about beekeeping. And now, after 6 years, I'm a full-time beekeeper. I work for commercial beekeepers. I raise queens, and it's basically taken over my entire existence. It doesn't happen like this for everybody, but I can tell you that it is a rabbit hole that once you start down, chances are you're going to find some very interesting things, and you may not want to go back. All right.
I think addiction is the correct.
Let's find out what the next slide is. Oh, there they are, the sheep. Okay, next. Oh, this is a video that's, can you play it?
We'll find out. Yes, I can.
All right. This is a swarm. This is me standing in a swarm in England. This swarm came out of, can you guys hear me over the bee noise? Okay. This swarm came out of what's called a Luzuten hive, which is a huge, enormous hive. You take the long end of the Langstroth frame, turn it sideways, and it becomes the short side of the box, and then it's about 20 frames long and double deep. This swarm probably weighed 10 to 12 pounds, and it was one of 9 swarms that emerged from this hive during the course of June. The first swarm is called the prime swarm, and the secondary swarms are called cast swarms. You can see the bees are starting to condense. They're getting into that bush. Probably some of them have landed and started to fan. They stick their little butts up in the air, and they tilt the very end of their abdomen down, and there's a gland there called the Nasonov gland. They fan their wings, and they emit a pheromone that smells just like lemongrass. Standing in the middle of a swarm is one of the most amazing smells. I love the smells with beekeeping, if you haven't caught on to that, but it is totally magical. Very, very beautiful. And all the bees can smell it. The queen can smell it. Eventually, she'll go in there and land, and then you can shake that swarm into a basket. But you do have to wait. So there's this magical, breathless, several minutes.
A colony that doesn't go through this is amputated, don't you think?
All right, that's enough of that. That was Heidi Herman, my first beekeeping mentor. She was very into biodynamics, if anyone's ever heard of that. Very into kind of the spiritual aspect of beekeeping and the magic of it all. Give me the next one. We're done with that. Enough of that.
Your clicker sucks.
Everything sucks.
Needs a new battery.
Go.
Hold on. Uh-oh.
Not again.
Don't panic. No,
Scroll down.
all right. Where are we?
The tall, skinny one.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Oh. All right. This is always a really interesting moment in beekeeping. Who here keeps bees with gloves on? Who here keeps bees without gloves on? About half and half. So gloves are awesome. All the protective gear is awesome. What it does is it gives you a sense of security and safety. There's never any shame in feeling like you need to wear protective equipment or in feeling like you don't want to. It's all about the relationship that you have with the bees. So if you have never met bees before and you feel like jumping in there and not wearing gear and you're not afraid and you get stung in the face and it hurts a little bit but it's kind of okay, there's no problem with that. If you're terrified but intrigued and you really want to try it but you just can't handle it really quite, put on the suit. Put on the suit. You'll be able to get close. You'll learn a lot. But there is this thing that happens when you start to take off the layers of protection between you and the bees, especially with the gloves. There's this very poignant moment that I had when I first caught a swarm by myself in England. I had caught them the day before. They absconded. The word abscond is one of my favorite words in beekeeping. It means that you catch the swarm and you put it in a box and they don't like it and they leave. It also happens if a hive gets sick or if it gets overrun with hive beetles or any other type of pest. So when this was happening, I was watching this box like a hawk. I was only weeding around this area. That part of the garden looked amazing. And then I saw them start to go, and I took off running, and I grabbed a cardboard box and a sheet, and I didn't even think to grab protective equipment. I chased them down the valley, chased them probably half a mile. They landed in a tree in the middle of the valley, and I'm standing under the tree, and I'm looking up at the swarm, and I have the box, and I'm ready to go, and then I realized that I'm not wearing any protective gear. And I went ahead and shook them, and they got in my ears, and they got in my hair, and they got in my shirt, and they got all over me, and I didn't get stung one single time. And that's because oftentimes swarms are very gentle. I will say, we live in Florida, so that's not always the case. I have met some swarms in Florida that are not gentle. It's always important to approach bees with respect and consideration and to pay attention. The one moment during that experience where I did get stung, I was trying to rush them into the box with my hand because I was in a hurry. I pushed them too hard and one of them stung me. So this moment when you take off your gloves for the first time, a swarm is a perfect time to do that. They'll all be standing, maybe you've just caught them in the skep or the box or the cardboard nuke box or whatever you have available, and you've dumped them at the entrance of the colony that you want them to move into. And they're all starting to run. They all run together as a big sheet up the ramp that you make for them or up the cement block that the box is standing on or whatever they can find. And if you put your hand there, they'll run onto your hand. And you'll see them all standing there, all facing the same direction with their little butts in the air, just wafting lemongrass into your face. And then suddenly, it really won't seem scary. It almost feels like you're wearing a pair of velvet gloves with their little feet walking on your hand. All right. So this is the swarm that stole my heart. The swarm landed in two places. It arrived on May 26th, 2013, and it was extremely small. Give me the next one. So small that you could hold it on a little stick. This is Heidi Herman with this tiny little swarm. All right. This is what I talked about with the scenting. So these bees are all standing on this skep. Presumably the queen is inside of this skep. You've placed it upside down on the ground and you've put a stick or some other thing so that there's an entrance, a gap between the ground and the thing that you've caught the swarm in. You'll see the bees are starting to go in. If you didn't get the queen, they'll all fly right back up to where you got them from. If you got the queen, they'll start to do this. They'll line up, they'll put their butts up in the air, and they'll start fanning their wings. You can't even see the wings on this one because they're moving so fast. Let's see if we can, this one right here has its abdomen tilted down. Can you see the very tip of its abdomen? It's this little strange little tilt. That's where the Nasonov gland is. I think this one's doing it too. All right. These skeps are coated in cow manure. It seals them against water. It makes them last a lot longer. All right.
They grow mushrooms?
Probably. We could try, play it, see what happens. What do we got? There you go, the shaking. You can kind of beat the end of the thing if you want to, get all the bees out. Personally, now knowing what I know, I would shake the bees into the container that I wanted them to go in instead of in front of it, and they would be much more likely to stay. Also, if you give them a frame of larvae, yes.
Really quick, you obviously you didn't physically catch the queen in these swarms.
Not in this case. That does sometimes work, and it also sometimes doesn't work. Yeah, we can shut this down and go to the next one. Now, given what I've learned, when I do a swarm catch or a removal, I almost always get the queen. It's the first thing I look for. It's the only thing I'm thinking about. It's sometimes the only chance that I have of that colony staying and surviving. If you're not able to cage that queen, you're 50-50 at best whether they'll stay. Especially if you're doing a removal, because it can be very traumatic for the bees. You're cutting actively through brood comb, you're getting honey everywhere, you're stepping on bees, you're getting stung, you're getting upset, it's hot, you're wearing the suit, you can't see through the veil. It's all very frustrating. So that's another advantage of learning to move with the bees in a way that doesn't upset them. The more that you know about the way that they communicate and the way that they move, the less protective gear that you have to wear and the more effective you'll be as a beekeeper. You can see better, you can feel what's going on, you can hear what's going on around you. All right, okay. This is just an example of how to make a skep. There we were really lucky. We had these awesome precision laser cut frames to make them on. That was super fun. But you can make them with any kind of frame you want. You can use a beach ball, it doesn't matter. And you use a cane to wind around the rye straw so that you can bind them together. All right. No, we don't need to see that.
He looks better like that.
This is usually a better timed joke, but at this point you're really starting to think, what have I gotten myself into? Really got to get my head in the game here. All right, what's next?
They're a little challenging to inspect, aren't they?
Skeps are, in fact, in my opinion, yeah, we're going to get to that. The thing about skeps is I actually don't think that they're challenging to inspect. And the reason is because they're very small colonies. They're pretty accessible to visual inspection from the bottom. Granted, it's not legal to keep colonies in this state without having removable combs. It's a removable comb law. You have to be able to pull the comb out in its entirety and look at the brood to sample it. But in England and in all over Europe, people have run bees like this forever. You just tip up the side of the box and you look from the bottom. It's one of the easiest tricks that you can use with any kind of hive, whether it has removable frames or not. If you don't want to be pulling frames out of the center of the brood nest, if the bees are mean, if the box is very heavy, if there's a lot going on, if you're trying to find the queen, you can just crack the top box, stand it up, peek underneath there. You can look at the quality of the brood. You can see how much honey they have. You can see whether they have queen cells, whether they're going to swarm. You can see whether there's drone brood. You can even reach in there and cut a piece of comb out and look at it and see if there's disease. So I'm not encouraging people to keep skeps, but I'm just showing you the different varieties of hives that are out there. Yeah.
Really quick, earlier when we started, you asked about the inspection of the hive, and I started on it, and then, like me normally, I get sidetracked on something else. When you get a chance, could you go over your process of inspecting the hive?
Yep, I absolutely can. And we could even bring up the Long Live the Queen talk, and I could show you some really good pictures on that at some point too. All right, next. All right, there's enough of the England. Move on. What's next? Okay, here we go. So bees can live in Langstroth hives. What have we gone over? We've gone over Langstroth, we've gone over skeps, we've gone over top bars. I don't have any awesome pictures on hand, I think, in this presentation of top bars, but if one comes up, I'll explain more about what they are. I will speak a little bit just to the definition.
There's a top bar out in the apiary.
Perfect, we can go into that.
Yep.
So a top bar is a classic example of a horizontal hive. If you want to break it down like this, there are two basic types of hives. You have vertical hives and horizontal hives. Vertical hives include Langstroth hives, Warray-style hives, anything where you're either supering, which means putting a box on top of the existing colony, or under-supering or nadering, where you're putting a box underneath and asking the bees to grow down. Horizontal hives, unlike those, are only one level. So the neat thing about that is you can have a top bar that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet long, who knows, and you never have to lift a box. Except the one time when you're trying to get it there, which is sometimes a pain in the butt. But you just can take this one frame, this one bar out, look at it, put it back down. No heavy lifting, no hauling around of big boxes of honey, none of that. No back pain. Horizontal hives are very cool. They work really well in Florida because we have a warm climate here. You can keep bees in a hollowed out log and lay these on top of it. You can keep bees in a plastic bucket on its side with the end cut off, lay these on top of it. You can make a hive out of straw or old chair. What's that? What are those chairs that are made of? Wicker, old wicker chairs. Anything that you can think of, you can make a top bar hive out of, which is really fun. Also, in Florida, you'll find that there are a lot of things to do with beekeeping that have actually nothing to do at all with hives or boxes. Bees here tend to swarm a lot. You find a lot of wild colonies. I would be willing to bet that there's at least 10 wild colonies within a mile of where we're sitting right now. That chances are nobody knows, but yeah, probably more. This is a hive that moved into the underside of a trailer. That's a really popular spot. Also storage containers, they'll go right down into the ground underneath there, and it can be very difficult to get them. They'll move into your soffit, they'll move into your mailbox, they'll move into your car, they'll move into just an upside down flower pot, very popular. 5 gallons is a really good size for that, especially if you want to use those as swarm traps. You just turn those flower pots upside down, spray a little swarm lure in there. Swarm lure is, they produce it commercially, or you can make it yourself. You can use lemongrass oil, a drop or 2, in whatever container you want them to move into. Or you can put just a spritz of Swarm Commander, which is my personal favorite title for a swarm lure. I also find it works pretty well. You can put a handful of dead bees, some old comb, some old brood. Using used equipment is probably the best bet that you have to catch bees. If you put boxes in an equipment pile in your apiary, I can almost guarantee you'll have at least 1 swarm move into them sometime during the season. There's a lot of cool activities associated with bees that are living in the wild in Florida. There's also a lot of cool employment opportunities associated with that. You can do bee removals, where you actually get paid to get bees for free. Really handy. It's even cooler if you have a bee yard right nearby, and then your bees are swarming, and then there are more removals to do. All right, we got a question.
Real quick, so if I put a swarm catcher box up, how long should I leave it there for when I notice that they've made themselves at home?
If they've moved in, I would just go, if you have other colonies that you can pull a frame of eggs and young larvae from, just go ahead and take them before they build combs in there, because then you won't have to remove them. Like if you see a swarm move into a box, just dump them out of that into the thing you want them to live in, and give them some young larvae and some eggs, and hopefully cage the queen.
Then they'll boom.
And feed them. And chances are they'll be great. Feed goes a long way towards getting bees to stay.
I noticed a lot like what you were saying about a lot of my old, like I said, I'm new to it, but I have a lot of equipment that I've acquired in my garage. And you open up the garage doors and a half hour goes by and every single box in there is covered in bees.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's awesome down here. It's like a magic land. Okay. All right, here we go. This is a great picture of how big swarms can actually get when they're left to their own devices. This is a colony that Sierra, who I believe is also in the back of the room, collected down in Key West one year. This picture is actually the picture that inspired me to seek out Sierra as my mentor. Yeah, I had come back from England, and then I was living in Gainesville. I didn't find a beekeeping mentor there, ironically. I moved to Bradenton. I found a beekeeping mentor there. I worked for a guy who ran about 100 colonies, sent them to California for almonds. I moved to Sarasota. I worked for a woman named Alma. And she is the first person who ever introduced the idea of queen rearing to me. And then in the summer of 2015, I had moved to Delray Beach, and I was looking for a mentor, and I was online Googling everything I could about bees. And I saw this picture, and I said, that's the one. So I called Sierra up, and she had just finished buying a brand new bee truck, told me that I could come out someday next week. I ended up hanging out with her a few days a week all summer. Eventually she started paying me for my help, and then it was pretty much all over from then on out. Sierra was the first person who ever taught me how to catch a queen. First time I ever had a queen fly out of my hand. It's very upsetting the first time that happens, but you do learn that if that queen made it in the box that you got her out of, chances are if you wait about 5 minutes, she'll come back. You'll get a second chance at catching her. All right.
Patience.
Yeah. All right. This is me. Yes, I had much longer hair then. This is at a beekeeping workshop that Sierra ran at a bee yard really just down the street from here. It's an example of how, a lot of the whole thing about wearing protective gear is in your head. I'm standing here in the midst of a cloud of bees, wearing a tank top and shorts, and everybody else is in full gear, and they're not stinging me. Part of that is because I'm not talking. A big thing is when you open your mouth, you start talking, and the carbon dioxide is escaping your mouth. The bees can track that back to your face. They want to sting you right here, which in my opinion is the most painful place to get stung ever, in the septum. They want to sting you in the lips, and the mouth, and the eyes. They want to sting you in the face. So if you're not speaking, and you're moving slowly, oftentimes you can get away with not wearing much protection in the bee yard. If you're giving a presentation in the bee yard, and you're not wearing a veil, chances are you're going to get stung in the face. All right. Okay. This is a great photo also taken by, I believe Al Salopek took this photo in also the summer of 2015. This was a really exciting removal. They were hired to remove, how many colonies were in that tree? 3?
5.
5, okay.
But it was in Jupiter.
Yeah.
We ended up not removing the bees. And we closed up the hole that you're crawling into with screen and actually drilled into the tree higher up to give them an entrance above the people. So the bees could stay living in the tree without affecting any of the people. But that tree is the oldest tree in Jupiter, and it's all fenced off. And the only thing that was keeping that tree alive was the bees that were in the tree, because they were continually cleaning the decay.
That's amazing.
From the inside of that tree.
Wow.
And so I convinced the botanist of Jupiter not to remove the bees.
Good job.
Where is that?
You know where the new train station is, the train station museum, right?
It's all there.
You're right at US 1 there. It's right next to that.
Next to the train station, the yellow building they put up there?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll go
Tucka
there.
was the
I'll
only
check it
one
out.
that would fit inside the tree.
It was awesome. I don't actually even remember why I got inside of the tree.
Because we could.
So the colony was awesome. The next one might be looking down into the tree, but nope, it's not that one. It was really cool though. I climbed into the tree, the entire area inside of the tree. My feet were on the ground at the base of the tree, and the entrance to the hole that I climbed into was over a foot above my head. And the combs were overhead, and the whole area was propolized. There was just propolis all over the inside of the tree. It smelled unreal. It was very cool. This also had some kind of well-timed witty joke associated with it, but I don't remember what it was. Okay. More swarms. Really cute one. Birds and the bees. All right.
Very good. Birds and bees.
This is a really big swarm, actually, from one of Sam Comfort's bee yards up in the Hudson Valley of New York. It's not always that common to see such large swarms up there like you would necessarily see here, although it does happen. This particular swarm was just, I thought, very picturesque, so I threw it in the presentation, I guess. All right, more swarm catching. I think we've kind of covered swarm catching. Maybe we should see what else there is. Wild hives living in trees. Let's move on. All right, okay, so here, let's talk a little bit about Warre-style hives. So this is also an image from one of Sam Comfort's apiaries, and this is also in the Hudson Valley of New York. You'll see these boxes are really cool. They're a little bit different in dimension from the original boxes created by Émile Warre, who was a French beekeeper. I believe he was a priest. And he originally coined this hive as the people's hive. And he felt that it was important that people had direct access to being able to keep the bees. And he wanted it to be affordable and easy for them to get the materials that they needed to make a hive. I like to call these box hives. I've also heard them referred to as comfort hives. They have a slightly different dimension than the original Warre hive. They're only 6 inches deep. It makes it so that there are less side attachments in the box. Side attachment is kind of the same thing as that comb that I was telling you about between the Langstroth boxes. They'll build that crazy comb and they'll attach the comb to the side of the box, making it really difficult to get the frames out. But it creates more structure for the bees so that the combs aren't as fragile. These are about 12 inches in diameter, and I believe the interior is 11 inches. But these skewers fit just perfectly in them, which is really handy. And you can stack them up tall or leave them short. This happens to be a picture of a mating yard where we were mating queen bees. And each of these stacks has 4 mating nukes on it. The box on the bottom is one of these boxes cut in half with a divider board with an entrance going in each direction. And then there's a feeder box. The third box is perpendicular to that one, also with 2 colonies, and then another feeder box. You can set up all sorts of different interesting colonies with beekeeping. I know this is a beginner's workshop, so I won't get too much into queen rearing or any of that stuff, but I just wanted to point out that there are about as many opportunities to keep bees in different ways as you can think of. All right, this is more of these colonies. You can see these actually even a little bit better. The feeder rooms are here. It also creates a dead airspace. These are on a screen bottom board. Screen bottom boards are interesting. A lot of people who are into treatment-free beekeeping use screen bottom boards so that the mites fall through them. I don't really buy it. Mites are pretty athletic. If you've ever seen a mite run, they're super fast. I think we're kind of kidding ourselves that they can't get back up into the box if they fall through the screen. But this is obviously probably not a situation that anybody who is a simple backyard beekeeper is going to get into anytime soon, but we spent a while amassing all of these hives in this yard, which is called a loading yard, so that we could then put them all on a vehicle and haul them far away. This is something that a lot of people do. I'm not going to be able to show you any of the pictures from Joseph Radensky's loading yard, who is also here in the room. But that's a really impressive one because he has literally hundreds of colonies lined up on pallets and stacked ready to go on semi-trucks to California.
That didn't look like New York either.
Which one? No, that was Florida. That was Florida. All right. What can I say about this? Beekeeping vehicles are really important. You can use just about any vehicle for beekeeping. It's pretty amazing. If anyone saw me stuffing 500 frames into my miniature Toyota Tacoma this afternoon, that's a thing that you can do. My personal favorite is the Sprinter van. Who here owns a Sprinter van and uses it for bees? It's got to be more than two. There's a couple. Okay, all right. They're really handy vehicles. They run really well on the road. They have a lot of space. You can even get them with air conditioning. And then you can move the bees around in the air conditioning. It enables you to make splits and move them in comfort. You don't have bees cook as easily. You're able to, just generally work bees in an easier way. You can fit a lot of lumber in them. These are the boards that are used to build this type of box. They're super cheap, really easy to make. It's just one screw right in each side. They're actually self-correcting so that if you have unlevel ground, you can twist them just a little bit. And then they don't have to be exact. There's a lot of things in beekeeping that aren't exact. When you start out, you want all the boxes to be like painted and beautiful, and the corners have to line up, and there can't be any holes, and all of these things. And then later you discover that there's all sorts of interesting things that happen when you embrace the fact that there's a hole in the back of your bee box. You can actually make a split that has an entrance facing in the other direction, because the bees just happen to be flying in and out of the back of the box.
Just make sure you plug it when you go to move it.
I actually move most of my bees unplugged, but I do it at night. Yeah.
2 miles though.
Yeah, this is just another nice swarm photo. This is actually taken by Sam Comfort, also in the Hudson Valley. Yet another example of how swarms can be extremely friendly. I like to call this swarm cuddling. All right.
It's a cute picture.
It is. All right, again, more advanced topics. These are what's called cell raisers or cell builders. So when you become completely obsessed like I am, and you fall so far into the rabbit hole that you can't get out, you'll probably eventually find yourself wanting to explore queen rearing. The queen is well, let's pass around a queen. Where'd she go? Here we go. Got a queen bee, compliments of anarchy apiaries. See if you can identify the queen as opposed to the 4 attendant worker bees that are in there feeding her and caring for her while she's stuck in that cage. Queen raising is endlessly fascinating. There's a lot of timing and looking at the calendar and figuring out what to do when so that everything will work. It takes about 10 days for a queen cell to come to maturity after you have grafted that queen cell. Grafting is a really fun activity where you use a little plastic tool. I keep them here in this plastic bag with my stamps and my passport. Right. Yeah, never leave home without your grafting tool. All right. I want to pass around the one that I'm not attached to, because the one that I'm attached to is.
You really don't need a passport to get into Florida. That's a myth.
I live about 45 minutes from Canada in the summer. All right. All right, I'll pass this one around. This is the Chinese plastic push-button grafting tool. Very cool. You just stick it down into the comb. We can circle around the comb later, and I can show you how to do it if you want. But it's got a little flexible tongue. You just stick it down in there, and it scoops up the larva with the puddle of royal jelly that it's sitting in. You transfer it into a little plastic cup. And then you turn that cup upside down inside of a strong, queenless hive. And they will draw queen cells for you, and you can basically grow or farm queen bees this way. All right. Here we go, queen cells. They look like tiny upside down morels, if anyone knows what a morel mushroom is, or they also resemble peanuts. And when they're on the natural comb, sticking out from the comb, most of the normal cells will be facing horizontally like this. The queen cells will come out a little bit and then go down vertically. So they'll be hanging down off the side of the comb. They're really easy to identify like that. Okay. All right, lots of queen bees. Lots and lots of queen bees. If anybody is a beekeeper, already has hives, but needs to make a split, or needs to re-queen their hive, maybe they have a mean hive, or they just want a queen that is a different color, maybe you have a hard time finding the queen. You need one that's bright gold, right? That makes it easier to find her in there. Yes?
When you say a mean queen,
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? Does that make the other bees mean as well?
It does.
How is she mean?
So it's genetic, and if she has genetics, there's a couple different reasons. It can be genetic, and it's genetic when it's related to the queen. If it's not related to the queen, it could be the weather, it could be cloudy, it could be cold, they could be hungry, they could be sick, they could have mites, which are a parasitic, I don't even know what to describe them as. They're horrible. They're like tiny, but they're like ticks. If anybody has ever had a tick bite you, I kind of think of mites like that, only it's as if the tick were the size of a rabbit biting you.
So when they don't like the queen anymore, what makes them not like the queen anymore?
So let me answer your first question first. No, it's okay. So when it is genetic, the queen is mean if she has scutellata genes. So it's a particular variety of Apis mellifera. They're still honeybees, but they have a tendency to be flightier, to swarm more, to be more aggressive and more defensive. They'll sting you more readily. Another behavior that you'll notice when you're getting into beekeeping is headbutting. The bees will fly into you and headbutt you. If they're not stinging you, it's a warning. These are the signs that you can learn to read so that you can move more fluidly without upsetting the bees. So if the queen is like that, all the bees in the hive will be like that, because she's the mama of all the bees in the hive. All of those bees in there are sisters, and they'll all act the same way that the queen is acting. After you requeen a hive, it takes about 5 weeks for all those bees to die off. They will start to calm down often a little bit before that, but you'll have remaining angry bees until the whole cycle has turned over and the new queen's reign has become solidly in place. And what was your second question?
When they don't like the queen anymore, what makes them not like the queen?
There's a couple different reasons. One of them could be that the queen is starting to fail. Maybe when she was mated, there weren't enough drones that were sexually mature in the area to provide her with the sperm that she needed to lay for the rest of her life. So a queen bee only mates one time. That may happen during a series of mating flights over a couple of days or even a week, but once she's gotten the sperm that she needs by mating with between 1 and 40 drones, she never has to leave the hive again until the day that she swarms or the day that she dies. So they might not like her if she doesn't have enough sperm, and so she starts laying only drones. We call that a drone layer. And when that happens, what they'll do is they'll either die or they'll supersede. And that means that they will intentionally select a larva from inside of the hive and raise a new queen from the same genetics, and then she'll get mated anew, and they can sense when she's running out of sperm or something's going wrong with her. Supersedure can also happen if they have a high mite load, which means that there's more than 3+ mites per half cup of bees. And you can test for that.
Frames out there that were really bad, really speckled, and not very pretty.
Exactly.
It's a sign of a failing queen.
Yep. Yeah, and you can test for that by doing an alcohol wash, which perhaps is also something that we could do in the apiary tomorrow. Another question. Yeah.
That situation there, because that's why I thought one of my hives, because I had 8, and I'm down to 2 right now, so I just thought that maybe mites or the hive beetles scared them out.
Hive beetles are, let's talk a little bit about pests and diseases. So hive beetles are one of the biggest problems in Florida. They're not always, I hesitate to say that they're not ever a primary cause of hives dying, because sometimes I think that they actually are because they get out of control. But most of the time they're not. Most of the time, the only reason that your hive is going to succumb to actual death by hive beetle, which results in a slime out, which is basically a nightmare mess. You open the lid, and in its most advanced stages, you literally open the lid to the hive, and there's however much biomass was in the colony, including the wax and the bees. That's how high the level of writhing worms is inside of the box. And it's hot. It's like a heat is emanating from it. It's nightmare, horrible stuff. But it doesn't have to happen if your bees are strong enough. So you want to make sure when you're making splits or when you're just cultivating your colony in general that they never have more comb space than they can guard. Because the beetles will hide in the unguarded comb space and they'll breed. They especially like to hide and breed where there's pollen or bee bread fermenting in the hive.
So with the hive beetles in the ground around your hive, so the hive beetles, from what I've come to learn, is the hive beetles, they lay their little guys in
In the pollen.
the pollen, and then they come out and then they fall on the ground. They crawl out, make their way to the ground.
And they pupate down there.
And then they come out of the ground. So another thing that I thought I might have did wrong with my hives was I sprayed the ground around my hive.
With what?
Which just home defense, cheap pesticide.
I mean,
Idea? Yes.
I mean, look,
I'm not
this
gonna
is
do it again, but
this is a so this gets us back into the realm of treatment-free versus treatment, right? So some beekeepers like to use poisons to keep down the weeds or the ants or the termites or whatever else is nesting around. Right. So, well, the thing about hive beetles, though, I personally, if you're gonna go for a ground treatment, I recommend diatomaceous earth. You can sprinkle that around the hive. It's less harmful. It's not likely to actually mess with your bees because they're not going to be down there crawling on the ground unless they're dying anyway.
what about putting down like tar paper for
Yep.
on the roof?
Black tar paper is handy for a lot of reasons. It keeps the weeds down. It creates a microclimate around the hives that's warmer. The more sun that your hives can get, the less shade, the less beetles you'll have. My favorite management tool for beetles, aside from the diatomaceous earth, is chickens. Keep your bees in a yard with chickens, and you will not have any beetles, most likely, unless it's really in the shade. Also, second favorite would be microfiber towels. You can purchase them at pretty much any store. You can use the Swiffer pads. You can use Brawny Dynamax towels. You can use the Walmart cheap off-brand microfiber towels for cleaning. And what happens is you put them in there, and the bees tear them up, and the beetles get their feet stuck in them and die. You can also use Beetle Traps. You can use the old political signboard with the little plastic ridges on it. You can cut that up into squares and put it where you notice the beetles congregating in the hive. That's called what you call a beetle jail. So the bees will naturally build and create beetle jails out of propolis. Everybody know what propolis is? It's a resin that the bees make out of the sap from conifers. And I think cottonwood's down here maybe? Does anyone know?
Most any tree sap, so.
Any tree sap, okay. And so they make these jails, and they jail the beetles, and they can't get out, and the guard bees will keep them in there. And if you stick the signboard right where that is, and then you come back, when you open the hive, you know where it is, you grab it before they can get away, you throw it in a plastic bag and seal it shut. Yeah?
Question to Holland here. So, same route that you're going down with the signboard, old CDs packets, the really thin ones, not the thick ones, the really thin ones.
Cool.
Not drill a hole in that, but then we're going to the pesticide again. Put a little bit of cockroach.
Yeah, I've heard of people doing that.
Get to it, but it is in the hive per se. But you put that right in the corner and make sure it's all level with it. And I noticed that they pushed them all. I didn't have one in there. I had no trap in there, and then I put that in there, and the next day I had like 30. And
Yeah.
And it's all about how you put the trap in there.
It's a lot about placement because you want to put it in the areas where the beetles are already naturally congregating, and that's different in every hive. So you're going to want to get familiar with your hives, inspect them on a regular basis. I recommend every 2 weeks to a month during the season. Keep an eye on them. Not too much though. You don't want to be going into them every week because unless you want to learn a lot about bees, and in that case I recommend that you start with 2 colonies and you just assume that you're going to kill one of them. You go into that one every week, you check on them, you see how things are going, you disturb them, you leave the lid off for, an hour, like whatever you need to do. But then you make sure as a control that you keep the other one and you only go into that one once a month, just for your general inspection. You don't mess with it any more than you need to.
I had a frame, so it was some honey on it, but there was a lot of drone cells and a lot of white cells. So I stacked that into a catch box. I got the catch box yesterday, and it was full of white larvae, like happening slow.
And were they squirming and wiggling around?
Yeah, there were all of them on the
Those are probably hive beetle larvae.
high beach.
Yes, hive beetle larvae.
It could be like wax moth.
It could be wax moth, but if this is fresh brood that you took out of a colony that's decomposing,
Okay, yeah.
it's most likely hive beetles. The wax moths don't move in until later. The hive beetles come in, they eat all the pollen, they pupate, they do their thing, they slime everything out. If there's anything left, then the wax moths will take care of it.
So what should I do with that? Put the dust back?
I mean, you could just leave it there, but the thing about it is, if there's a lot of beetle larvae, you don't want them pupating and growing and spreading around. So yeah, plastic bag in the sun. Sealed plastic bag in the sun. Yeah, chickens, guinea fowl, whatever you got. I'm gonna cut you off in a minute.
Yeah, oh yeah. But back when you saying that with the mites, because that's been my biggest issue since I started. I did the 6 months I've been started. And once you let that happen in his state, and you leave that box sitting there, your mites are going to be out of control.
Well, but he's talking about beetles.
Oh yeah, I mean, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hive beetles.
Yeah.
Once those hive beetles lay their larvae, and then the larvae comes out, and then that, and then
It can get out of control fast, but with one frame with drones in a bait hive, I doubt you're gonna kill everything. It'll probably, but still, yeah, it's good to keep the hive beetles under control.
Who's that?
Shall we? Oh yeah, this was a talk that was all about who do you want to be as a beekeeper. So this is a good kind of, yeah. This was from a women in beekeeping talk that I did. So when you start to get into bees, you are initially just consumed with fascination, right? There's a lot of things to learn. Everything's new. There's all sorts of new words and vocabulary and the ways to make decisions. And then eventually, after you start to ask yourself, what am I trying to get out of this? Why am I keeping bees? Why do I like to get stung in the face so much? Whatever it is that's going on for you, you're gonna start to think, what am I trying to accomplish here? And so the answer could be, well, I want to make honey, or the answer could be, well, I just love the way that they sound when they swarm, or it could be that I want to produce wax to make lip balms, or some kind of product for skincare, or it could be that you want to pollinate your garden. It could be that you want to take all your bees to California and make boatloads of money pollinating almonds. It could be that there's a million different ways to keep bees. You can have a colony that you rarely go into, that you allow it to swarm. You can keep them on your roof. You can have a colony that you're trying to get everything that you possibly can out of. So this picture was just in here to remind me to tell people to think about how you really want to be keeping bees. What's the next one? Oh, this is another option. Very exciting option. Okay, give me the next one. Okay. Smoke them if you got them. Yeah. So this was also in the talk that I prepared for tonight. Smokers are great. They're really useful tools. You're going to want to especially use them if it's raining out, or it's gray out, or it's cold, or it's cloudy. This is a picture of me harvesting brood for cell raisers in Vermont in April. It was literally raining all day, and we got a little bit out of control with the smokers. All right. This is also a really useful image. So this is a picture of a flatbed truck that's loaded up with nucleus colonies for sale. Also in upstate Vermont at my boss Mike Palmer's apiary. When he makes these, he'll bust down colonies that have survived the winter. Obviously not really applicable to Florida beekeepers, but we do this here as well. Joseph Radensky makes nukes. These are 5-frame nukes. It's pretty much the typical way that you're going to purchase these in a nuke. They're going to have more or less 3 frames of brood. You're going to have some capped brood, some open larvae, some eggs. You're going to have enough bees to cover each of these frames and then some. You're going to have at least 1 frame of food, so nectar, capped honey, pollen, and then an empty frame. Usually you want that empty frame to be drawn comb, but I've also seen it be foundation, and I think that's considered acceptable when you're selling nukes. You can put these into these cool waxed cardboard boxes. For transport, they have screens built in so that you can move them around with airflow and transport them more easily. They don't last super long, so I actually prefer the plastic Jester ones, which are a little more expensive, but more durable. Yeah, Jester Easy Nukes, those are great. All right. This is a cool picture. So this is a large colony, right? This colony has overwintered, and then this is a yard that is in process of being broken down. So each one of these colonies is being broken down into nucleus colonies, and they're placed in the same spot that the original hive was. Anytime you want to make a split or do a walkaway split, or anything involving changing what's going on inside of the colony, you want to think about where the field force is coming in. So the field force is the bees that are going out into the field to forage for nectar and pollen and water. One of the most dangerous jobs in the hive is actually collecting water, because it's really hard to approach a water source without drowning when you're a bee. So you want that field force, this is the entrance, you want that field force to be coming in the same place where the entrance to the hive that you broke down is. Very important. This is getting a little advanced. This is a mating nuke. Let's skip this. More queen cells. What do we? Let's look at this. Let's scroll down. How do we scroll down?
You just go another 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll do questions and get out of here.
I had such a good talk. I spent all day on it.
Now you're tired, yeah?
All right. Okay, so some of the perils and challenges of beekeeping in Florida. One of the biggest ones is hurricanes. Very exciting every time there's a hurricane here. This is an image of an apiary down in Homestead, also from Sam Comfort. We drove down from New York when we heard that Irma was coming, and we tied down 450 of these Warrior-style bee colonies with rope, with ratchet straps, with anything we could find. When a hurricane is coming, there isn't really much that you can do for your bees except tie them down and hope for the best. You also want to make sure that they're up off the ground far enough to avoid flooding. And in this particular case, we got really lucky. Show me the next image. This is what happened to the apiary. 5 large trees fell on top of these boxes, but because of the ratchet straps, none of the colonies were lost. 4 of them absconded because of beetles, but I caught all of the queens. They were all together in one swarm, killing each other at the time when I found them. So I put them all in cages, and then righted everything, sawed all the branches up with a handsaw, put them on new pallets, set all the boxes back up. You can recover from an amazing variety of things in Florida. We're really lucky because even if you lose all your bees to something like a hurricane, you're back in business within a year if you put up enough bait hives. Right. Oh, another interesting peril of Florida beekeeping. Anybody familiar with these guys? Yeah. Buffos.
Pellet gun.
Right? Hive tool. So these are horrible. What they'll do is you'll have a colony that's, say it's on a stand about 2 feet off the ground. You've got one big fat bufo toad sitting on the ground. The next one hops up, jumps on the first one's back. 3rd bufo toad comes up, jumps on top of the pile. 4th one comes, jumps on top of the pile. I've actually seen maybe 10 toads sitting on top of each other. They create a ladder, and then the one on the top gets up on the landing board of the hive and bangs its head against the wall of the colony. Bees come out and the toad eats them. And then it bangs its head against the colony and the bees come out and the toad eats them. And this can go on until it actually creates significant problems for you because so many of the field force bees have been eaten by toads. So I like to collect them and put them in trash cans. Yeah?
I put a fence board under the entrance to the colony and the toads couldn't get up there.
That's a great idea. Really smart. Just so they can't hop onto the
fence board under the entrance. The toads couldn't get up there.
Yeah,
They were jumping up and eating the bees.
I'm telling you, you wouldn't believe that a toad could actually eat enough bees out of a colony to cause it distress, but they can. Okay.
What about the little lizard?
What's that?
The little lizard?
The lizards will eat them too, but I don't find that they're as insidious. The toads just don't stop. The lizards get full and go away.
The toads in my yard see me come in, they start running. So I stand about 25, 30 foot away and I get them with the pellet gun.
I've actually seen Sierra put a hive tool straight through a toad. Wait, hold on. Let's take you first because you've still out.
No, I'm just making it. My wife uses a slingshot.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love that.
My question was about the Yellowjackets.
Yellowjackets,
About Yellowjackets.
they're evil.
Yeah, they continue to stink. But I had a little issue where I noticed that I was sitting there watching my hive, you know, it's like a fish tank to me.
Uh-huh.
You know, you sit there and watch it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this Yellowjacket kept coming in and out. And then I read something online, they eat the larvae.
They eat the babies, yeah. They go in and they eat the larvae. They eat the baby bees. Yeah. If anybody ever is really bored and you want to Google different wasps and hornets going into beehives, some people have set this to very dramatic classical music, and you'll see the large Asian hornets going into the colony, and the bees actually attack them and surround them so closely, and they start vibrating their wing muscles, and they actually cook them to death.